Over 170 years ago, Henry David Thoreau observed, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Is this you? Do you feel trapped in the rat race we call life? Are you truly the person you desire to be? Are you unhappy with where you find yourself physically, mentally, or spiritually? Let's make the life changes necessary to empower you with happiness and contentment, belief and confidence in yourself. Join the discussion with countless other people who want nothing more than to be the best version of themselves that they can be. Welcome to Better with Jimmy Blackman. Hey folks, welcome to Better. I'm your host, Jimmy Blackman, and excited today to do something a little bit different. Up front, let me just say, if you have not seen episode 2 of Better, which is PTSD and alcoholism, then stop. Go to that episode, watch episode 2, and then come back and pick up right here because we're going to unpackage that. Of course, episode 2 was my experience with going through and dealing with PTSD that ultimately led me to a pretty dark place, being an alcoholic, frankly, and then where I'm at today. And today I've got Dr. Shauna Springer, full disclosure, a great friend of mine and a friend of the warfighter on with us today. And Shauna, I guess I'm the brave one because you're going to, I was going to say you're going to unpackage this. You're going to unpackage me, right?
Very respectfully, yes, I am, at your request.
Yes, I want to be totally transparent about this. I want people to be able to hopefully relate in some way, or at least see that, you know, I dealt with it and got help, and you can too. You don't have to live by yourself with your demons. There's light at the end of the tunnel if you want there to be, but ultimately you have to make that choice. And that's what I found at the bottom of the proverbial well, was that the only person that could change me was me. I had to want help. And so Shauna is, she is the chief psychologist for Stella and the lead psychological advisor for Magnus Works. And she is a professional in the field, as I said, having dealt for years now with military soldiers and first responders. So welcome, Shauna.
Thank you. Just want to double. When we talk about our own struggles in these kinds of forums. But you're not my patient. You're not my patient. You're my friend. I'm not violating any patient confidentiality. And you've asked me to review episode 2, which everybody should review because you'll get a lot more out of this conversation if you have the context for what we're talking about. And you've asked me to help you kind of unpack it and give it some psychological analysis.
Yeah. So I want to start with a question to you that I think is arguably the most common thing that those dealing with PTSD, I guess, grapple with in their mind. And that is why I don't have PTSD. Why would I have PTSD? And then you look at other people comparatively and say, they went through something more traumatic than me. They experienced something worse than me. And this is years of me going through my mind, and the event that we'll talk about later that happened to kind of really make me realize I had a problem and the nightmares began was not a seriously traumatic event compared to other events that I experienced. I mean, it wasn't a knife fight with the enemy. I had much worse, I guess, stressful situations where I was pretty darn sure I was going to die, and that I had soldiers shot and dying around me that I didn't seem to struggle with. It was this event and something about it that triggered this that led to it. So when I would then have a problem, I'd be like, well, that can't be the origin. This isn't PTSD. I mean, that isn't that bad. And so going back and forth, not wanting to admit it to myself, but yet questioning, and certainly not going to tell someone else I had a problem, because I would think they would look at me and think, well, really, you? So what do you think? Why do you think it is that I didn't see myself as having PTSD?
Because you're a storyteller, you're a high functioning guy. You know, I've known you for years to be a phenomenal storyteller and writer. I've read your books, and um, you have a story in your head, like a lot of people, about what PTSD is and what causes it. And there's kind of like this Hollywood script that somebody has this singular event that leaves them feeling locked in helplessness or blocked by feelings of horror, and that is what causes PTSD. Um, you had many events when you were over in combat, and I actually don't even know if this should be a conversation about PTSD. First, I want to introduce the concept of, in 42 states out of every state in America, there's been a shift to describe this as PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, rather than PTSD, with a new line of thinking that I very much have seen play out, that when you're in a certain environment for long enough, there's an injury, a biological injury that happens. And I think focusing in on that one index event, trying to pin it down and hunt for it, that's what a storyteller does. But it's actually, I think, going to miss the big picture of really what your experience was. So when you were in combat, you went a mile a minute. I mean, you were working 18-hour days under constantly high stress scenarios, very high stakes, actively vigilant, hyper vigilant, in an adaptive way, for 18 hours a day. Your sleep was disrupted. You had to be on point quickly, wake up and be in that mode of a military leader protecting your people. And so I actually think it's kind of a bigger issue than just this one event that leaves a person feeling traumatized. It is the change in your overall fight or flight system, what I call chronic threat response, that really is the bigger issue in your case, rather than kind of classically defined PTSD.
That makes total sense. It didn't take but the second year in Iraq where we labeled what we did between. So you would go to combat, you would come back, and we called it reset. And we really thought of that as equipment because, I mean, your equipment, of course, takes a complete beating. And so you have to reset all your equipment. Like I knew when I came back from OIF 1, I already knew when I was going back the next time. So you got this compressed timeline. The stress doesn't end, by the way, and the pressure to get ready to prepare for now. I know what I'm going back to. And that for leadership, I think it's even compounded because I've got to get these people as ready as possible so that I won't live with someday standing at a memorial saying I didn't do enough or I didn't prepare. So that time back in the rear is anything but reset. And I remember when we got back back to Iraq, making the comment to the commanding general of the 101st. I was working directly for him that rotation, and I said, you also don't reset. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you pick up right where you left off. And from a psychological standpoint, it isn't like I did a year in combat. Even if I went on R&R to Hawaii and I laid on the beach every day, and I had counseling and I got spiritually attuned. When you go back, you don't start with a clean slate. all that baggage is still there. It's a part of who you are. And I remember it was like I never left. I remember thinking like I just picked up where I left off.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the term reset. I definitely, didn't influence that. That's your term, but it's exactly the issue is that, we think about systems breaking down, if you have mechanical equipment, there's an effort to maintain it, to put oil in it, to address, where it's become run down or where its systems may be altered based on a combat deployment. You get all the sand out of the works. And there's no comparable model except that there is. in special forces units, there is an opportunity for many operators to get a reset with that biological injury by using the stellate ganglion block. And that's why the company that I helped establish in 2020, Stella, we talk about a dual sympathetic reset. That's the word we use, because what it is it's basically restoring calm and bringing you back to baseline in your fight or flight system. Without that, lying on the beach is not going to get you back to baseline. You're just going to go right back into that system. And to your point, it's going to be a cumulative effect of further traumas and just a high-paced environment, high pressure, constant pressure, high pace, chronic threat environment. And that's what causes the biological injury.
Yeah. So it's, and then you add deployment after deployment after deployment after deployment with that, and and on the, it's interesting, the difference is I've got a lot of friends, of course, in the 160th here, Special Operations Aviation Regiment. They did little short tours, 3 to 4 months at a time. But it seemed several of my friends, one in particular, we talked ad nauseum about it, that it was even harder to him because of the contrast of, he's like, I would leave Bagram, I would take an Ambien, go to sleep on the floor of a C-17, wake up, and that night go to dinner with my family. And I'd been in a fight and killed 10 people that morning. And he said, I'd look around and get angry that the world had no idea what was going on. I left for a year. I mean, there's a different stress to that. There's a, hey, honey, I'll see you next year, have a Merry Christmas. But I didn't deal with this extreme contrast all the time.
Yeah. I mean, what we're talking about here is something common to people who have that kind of pace of deployment, going back and forth between two worlds. It's causing an emotional whiplash.
Yeah.
Going back and forth between two worlds with two different sets of rules, two different identities that many people, hold a little bit distinct. There's Jimmy, the, military leader. There's Jimmy, the father and husband, and so integration is hard no matter what, but the more you have to go bouncing back and forth between these two worlds in short order, the more whiplash you get. And if you think about this logically, right, this is why all of my work migrates now to first responders, because every single day they're going between two worlds in a single day over and over and over again, where they have, what they see on the street, and then they go home and they're expected to be a responsive, loving, calm, partner and parent. And there's still all this stuff from the other world that they're not getting any help with.
And by 2005, 6, you could FaceTime or Zoom your family at night. I guess Zoom wasn't around, but you could video conference your family every day in combat. And so you would go out on a patrol, and it was surreal. Soldiers talked about it all the time. They'd make jokes, but you make jokes about things that really kind of they kind of bite. They're in your mind. You've been ruminating on them. Like, okay, that was odd. Like, I just went through that, and then I just talked to my kids for 30 minutes, and they're in a swimming pool out behind the house.
Having a great time with no conscious awareness
of what daddy just went through.
There are some risks to blending the two worlds that way. Just going between them gets really odd and weird, and psychologically complicated, where we think about like ancient cultures, right? There was a really big separation between warriors going to war. They would come back from war. There would be these rituals to help them sort of psychologically reset and cleanse, from the experiences they had of fear, of rage, of all of it, really, that warriors experience before they came back to home and family. And now we're kind of like merging the two worlds, now that we're beyond the age of sat phones, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a bit about in episode 2, I shared what my chaplain Ron Thomas told me based on for those who refuse to go back to 2 and listen and come along the journey with us. My daughter drowned in my dreams every night for over a year, same dream every night, had nothing to do with combat. She drowned each night in this dream. And what Ron told me was that I felt in control there, and my body went to where there was a weakness or there was a vulnerability, and that was I felt totally vulnerable at home. Like anything could happen to my family, and there's nothing I could do to influence that whatsoever. And so that's where I had a chink in the armor. That's where the stress went and manifests itself. Now, my dreams changed. I want to talk about that in a minute later on, years later. But your thoughts on that? Why that dream?
Yeah, so dreams are not, literal, right? You don't necessarily dream something because it happened or because it will happen that way. Dreams are designed to make our body pay attention to something really important. But the way that they express themselves may be very metaphorical. And so you can't really try and take it as a literal sign that something has or will happen, but you have to think about what are the emotional feelings that this dream elicits? What are the themes? And it does sound like your chaplain is right when he talks about the theme of helplessness. When you think about like, where does the worst dream you could have go to? It does go to your most vulnerable place. It does go to your most primal fear. And for you, the worst feeling for a warrior is helplessness. So when people, when and if they go into kind of a fugue state, like I'll have warriors say from time to time, I just lost sense of time. I lost sense of awareness. I reacted without even knowing it. I became rageful. I became very violent. When that happens, it's often because it triggers their worst, most primal fear. Like they feel a kid or a spouse has been attacked or is in danger and they need to defend. And so you're going through all of this stuff and you're losing men over here and women, that you serve with. And then your family is so far that if anything happens on the home front tribe, there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
Yep.
So those,
Yeah.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, it sounds like that the helplessness. And that, came up, I think, in the one trauma that you did talk about in episode 2 around the mortar attack, where 2 soldiers were killed and 1 was wounded. They were there one moment and then gone the next, like somebody, is drowning, you can't get to them, there and then gone.
So then years later, this transitioned to different types of dreams, not the same dream, but the same theme. And I was in Jekyll Island speaking at a conference, and I spoke, and afterwards that night we had a dinner on the beach, and a former special forces operator came over, and he was retired and now working for one of these companies, and he came over and said, "Hey, you got a minute?" We stepped aside and started talking, and just talking. The guy started crying and sharing a lot of, he was really suffering from a lot of PTSD, and I told him about the dreams that I'd had over the last few years, and he just starts bawling. And he was having the exact same types of dreams. And that is, he would dream he was in combat, but he couldn't find his weapon, or his weapon wouldn't shoot, couldn't find his boots. Like, I've been barefooted. The enemy's attacking, and I can't find my boots, and I'm barefooted having to fight. The vehicles have left me, like the patrol left, and I'm alone on the objective. That theme comment, do you hear of that a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it takes different forms, but often those kinds of dreams happen around transition when you don't have your firearm on you. Maybe a lot of people, feel a vulnerability, a very acute sense of vulnerability. Some will carry a knife as kind of a substitute depending on where they live, but there's this sense of being naked and being stripped from all of your protections when you go through military transition. And remember, it's not just that literal level of I no longer have a firearm to protect myself and those I love, in some cases. it's also all of the psychological armor that comes with being a warfighter. So that whole identity loss, that loss of purpose, that loss of your tribe, that loss of the people that are to your right and left that protect you, also it ramps up greatly that feeling of vulnerability. And so a lot of times around that period, people will have dreams that speak to themes of vulnerability. And one of the things that people often report is, to your point earlier, it's not always the obvious thing that's the thing that really triggers you. I've had a number of warfighters talk about how the trauma that really sticks with them is when a dog was killed, for example, right? And they say, what is that about me that I was more heartbroken about this dog that we adopted, in country, was part of our unit, and he was killed, versus somebody else that I served and loved.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's an aspect in there of like the innocence and the ability of that thing to protect itself.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm having a look. I've got a visual right now of in Cowboys Over Iraq. I didn't make a big deal about it, but I wrote about it. We had a blue on blue, so friendly fire incident across a highway in Iraq. And a guy, I was over the top of him, realized what was going on. And I'm screaming on radios, trying to get these guys to stop shooting at each other. Meanwhile, local Iraqi on a bicycle with a yellow shirt is just riding his bike down the road. And I'm like, he's going to ride right into the middle of it.
The kill zone.
And he did, got shot right in the neck. And I remember watching his yellow shirt turn red. And it just, that stuck with me more than many fights. I don't know. I just like watching him. I couldn't stop him and thinking he's going to ride his bicycle right into the middle of a gunfight. And he did.
Yeah. And there we go with the helplessness theme, right? Because this is what I mean when I say for warriors and first responders, helplessness is the most intolerable feeling. Huh. You want to protect. And when you see something, whether it's a dog, a child, an innocent, get taken out, that gets stored a little bit differently than even the death of a brother in arms, a sister in arms, a professional warfighter, that kind of gets filed away in a different place of grief and loss than the kind of trauma that's so tied to helplessness.
Right. Okay. Hopefully the listener won't know except for me saying this, but technical difficulties. We had to take a quick break there and now we're back. So I think we were talking about how screwed up I am, I think, before we left.
No. How normal you are, and how I want to draw attention to the fact that there are these predictable behaviors that people do when they've been in a combat zone. So between the last little mini session and getting on this one, I saw you consume a large piece of fruit, maybe an apple. I don't know, what was it, hard? An apple in like 20 seconds. And you were like, hold on, I haven't had lunch. I'm starving. And I was like, it's okay. Like take a minute, but it's that same 1,000 miles an hour kind of setting that gets programmed as the default, right? The 16-hour days where you don't eat and then you like shove food into your mouth just as fuel, as energy, right?
That's all it is. It's fuel. I've got look, I went to the gym and lifted this morning, but I got a 3.5-hour bike ride this afternoon. I need to get the carbs in now.
Yeah.
But it can't distract from everything else that needs to be done. It's just
right. So
fuel.
There's like this pace that I just want people to be aware of that, is part of the issue of setting your adrenaline system on that constant fight or flight. And then with every behavior that you do that reinforces that, like, I got to eat, like, my life depends on it. Like, I got to get this food in me, like, in the next 10 seconds, because I've got a million more things to do with my day, is going to keep that fight or flight system right at that level where it's just going to be real hard to get calm control back in your body.
It makes me incredibly productive.
Yeah, it's not all
That's
bad.
what I'm known for. Like, people, even in the military, they're like, how you do so much? I have no idea. Like, how do you get it done? I'm very efficient. I can focus and just bam, 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 bam. I don't waste time. Now, it can manifest when I'm and I'm aware of it, so it makes it a little bit better, but I have a quick flash to bang. Like, I don't need to know how to build a Swiss watch. I need to know what I need to know. Now, when I was a commander, that was helpful because it helped me give guidance of, you don't have to explain to me how you're going to create matter. Okay. I don't need to know that.
Yeah.
I need to know what I need to make decisions on. I need to know where I need to allocate resources. Those are the things I need to be focused on. So don't come in here and build a Swiss watch in front of me because I'm going to get impatient.
There's an urgency, right? There's a time pressure to everything. And so here's the thing. People that are wired like you and me, for what it's worth, greatest strengths are our greatest vulnerabilities. So we will suffer and struggle at times in our lives and be very. So you don't see yourself in the mirror when this is the case as someone who has PTSD or has a substance abuse. You talked about in episode 2 how you basically got really drunk and then you biked the Leadville race the next day.
I didn't get
right?
drunk. It's hard to get drunk at that point, to be honest with you, when you drink.
Okay,
so
right.
But I drank a 6-pack of those 6 pints of those 8% beers. I certainly was. You wouldn't have known I drank at all. The guy with me had no idea because my tolerance at that point in the game was so high. But yes, I could function fine. I keep thinking, like, what could I have done if I hadn't have been drinking like that? But I did massive hard rides, very competitive. People had no idea. And the last hour, I was in a hurry to get to the finish line because all I was thinking about is where I'm going to get my first drink.
Yeah. Yeah. So the fact that you're able to drink enough to kill a small elephant and then compete the next day allows you to kind of trick yourself into thinking, I don't really have a problem. Alcohol is not really limiting the things like that I want to do, or if I can compete at this level athletically, it must not be too bad, right? Maybe, if it limited you more substantially or more clearly from things that you wanted to do, you would have coded it as a problem.
So it's interesting. So I can that really started to get me to lean toward, I really have to do something. Which was, I remember talking to friends of mine who were alcoholics, who were wealthy and had their personal doctor, and they did labs all the time to, liver function and everything else. And I would ask them, like, I would know, okay, you drink as much as I do. What do they tell you? And they're like, I'm good, man. Your liver's resilient and I'm good to go. And so I'd be like, well, I'm good to go for sure, because you've been doing this for years longer than me. And yeah, we're drinking about the same amount, or maybe I'm drinking a little more, but you've got 5 years on me. I'm good. But then I started,
as long as I'm under you in terms of my liver damage, right?
Yeah.
Then I'm okay. That's a novel concept.
Well, my liver's probably better than yours.
What? Yeah.
My liver's probably better than yours.
Curated, personalized medical care so that you can drink.
Yes.
Without as much anxiety, because you're getting frequent liver tests.
Absolutely.
And then you're drafting off of those tests.
Yeah.
You're looking at your friend.
When my friend gets in trouble, I know, I better
you're drafting off of their medical tests.
Yeah. Just
I've got some road. I've got some road before I really have to be concerned about this.
I absolutely thought that.
And this is the interesting thing, right, Jimmy, is that, like, in high school, the kids that are the most popular in some ways have the greatest risks of becoming alcoholics because they don't code it as a problem, because it's socially normed in their group. And they continue to have a good life, and they continue to do a lot of the things that they, would normally do. And so, again, there's like this story of what a PTSD sufferer is, or what a person struggling with substance abuse is. And woven into these Hollywood stories that we've adopted is, well, they're not really showing up for work. They're not really able to, do anything but lie in bed. They are feeling like their life has shrunk down. No, like, here you are with all of these symptoms of post-traumatic stress injury and alcohol dependence. And you're drinking so much, it's not even fun at this point. It's just to keep your body at that level where you don't go into withdrawals. And you're living this life and not seeing yourself in that mirror. And that is what I want to draw attention to.
But I'm laughing because what do you think my senior superlative was?
Give me three options, and
You've
I'm
already said it.
100%.
You said it.
I know, but yeah, give me three options, and I will 100% probably guess it right.
Well, no, you don't have to. You said the most popular kids in high school. I was the most popular. That was my superlative.
Okay.
I was in everything.
So,
And I could hang out. And I could hang out. I don't say that egotistically, but and I floated groups. I could hang out with the jocks because I was athletic. I did drama. I sang. I could the debaters, right? I didn't matter. I could move around those groups, and I did. And it's interesting that you would say that. And,
your greatest strength is your greatest vulnerability. That has allowed in your life for the threats to your well-being to sit in a nice, tidy space right there in your blind spot. And that's not just you. That's so many war fighters I serve whose bodies are very strong. And so they don't break down for a long time. And eventually they break down. Eventually you'll get like some kind of a cancer or a kidney problem or something like that, and the dominoes will fall.
Yeah.
But for a long time, that quote resilience is actually the problem.
Yeah. Well, that's, when my own labs started to come back, showing that it was taking a toll, that's when I started to, okay, wait a minute here. This is getting bad. But then I was at the point where I had to have it. There was no just stopping at that point. Yeah. I was no longer in control of the alcohol. It was in control of me.
When you had some advice from somebody in episode 2 let's talk about why that was. Because we didn't talk about episode 2. I want people to know why they should never just cut cold turkey when they're drinking as much as you were at that time.
Yeah. So I just decided that I needed to do something. And, by this point, my family are not saying anything, but they don't know how much. Because I was really good. Like I was really good at hiding it. I mean, for the average listener out there that may be naive, there are functioning alcoholics around you all the time. And for me, the world I lived in and have been living in as a consultant with Fortune 500 guys, flying first class with guys having, Bloody Marys for breakfast. And, these folks drink all day long, like bourbon for breakfast. I was not an anomaly. I was actually doing things that a lot of people I know live or do, and live a life that most would never have any clue that they were, that they had drank as much as they had by noon. So anyway, I decided enough. And so I tried to quit cold turkey. And my brother-in-law is a physician. He knew that I had a problem, and I had shared not everything with him, but I had been around him. He had seen me sneak off. We had gone mountain biking in Montana. We stopped to get gas. And while he's pumping gas, I run in and I have to go to the bathroom, stay a little late. Of course, all you do is you throw, a couple of those 8% pints up there and on the counter, pay for it, go to the bathroom, guzzle 2 pints to get a buzz and go back out to the truck, chewing gum on the way, and away you go. He knew all of that. I mean, he got what was going on. Go to vacation, you got the little shots stashed everywhere. And if you know what you're looking for, then you are going to see it. And so he knew that I had a problem, and he'd always, hey man, just, if you need to drink, take me, call me. He wanted to intervene, wanted to help, but he knew he couldn't just force his way in, or I'd shut him out. So he was not, he played it very well. So I quit. And my blood pressure started first. My blood pressure went through the roof. I was 170 over 145.
Your resting blood pressure.
Yeah.
To be clear, this is not you working
sitting on a couch.
This is just sitting there like a bump on a log.
Yep. Yep. Blood pressure went to 170 over 145. And then the tremors had been around for a while. And I had noticed that they had gotten closer. So initially, you sleep all night. You don't drink while you sleep. Some people do wake up and drink, by the way. But you don't drink during the night. You get up the next morning, you start your day. And by 10, 11 o'clock, you notice your hand's a little twitchy. You got to write something. I've had to sign books and was terrified. I was like looking for, if it wasn't at night, is there any way I can get a drink so I don't shake? So,
Yeah.
because I was trying to sign my name and I was shaking. And, those at first 7, 8 hours, I'd start getting a little tremor in my hand. As soon as you drink, boom, steady as you can be. So I noticed that those were down to like 4 hours. Like every 4 hours, I'd start to tremor a little bit. So at this point, my blood pressure goes through the roof and the tremors start, but I didn't give it what it wanted. So I started the full body tremors. I mean, the whole body was shaking. And I called my brother-in-law and I'm like, hey, man, I'm trying to quit. And here's my blood pressure. He's like, you need to
Take a
go get
drink.
a drink right now.
Get a
I'm like,
drink.
what?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you need to drink now. He said,
Yeah.
you're going to have a seizure. And
This is why I want to double tap this.
yeah,
So, what you're describing is something called DTs or delirium tremens that can happen when your body is so addicted to alcohol that it goes through a very dangerous form of withdrawal called DTs. And so it might seem counterintuitive for somebody that wants to help you quit and get your control back to say, hey, take a drink right now. But your brother-in-law was absolutely wise to advise that. And we're always very careful when we work with in Stella, anybody who's really using alcohol to that degree. It's so important that people are honest with their healthcare provider because you can die if you're not honest. And if your healthcare provider is a healer, they're not going to approach that with judgment. They're going to say, oh, all right, people drink because they want to change their mind state. They want to escape, from memories. They're having nightmares. They're using it to get to sleep. Like there's a lot of reasons why people use alcohol to try and feel okay. But you can't just stop it cold turkey if you're using that much, or it could be very dangerous.
yeah,
So I just wanted to double tap that and make sure people understood why he said that and why you should never just quit drinking cold turkey without support and monitoring and perhaps tapering down.
yeah. Well, it was a wake up call because as soon as I drank,
Yeah.
blood pressure came right back down. My just steady as I could be. I could do
Yeah.
anything. I mean,
That's when you know it's got you.
alcohol.
When
Yeah.
when your body system reacts to the loss of it that strongly, you have really gotten corner with those demons.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And at that point it was, it was all day, every day. I had gone, well, I drank a lot. So you had mentioned before you want to talk a little bit about, because it pissed you off.
Yeah.
I was read onto all these programs. I had, there's the TSSCI, top secret compartmentalized information. That's our highest level of clearance. But then there are secret compartmentalized programs you get read onto individually. And so I was read onto a ton of these things when I was leading policy plans and strategy and in the Pentagon. And so I sought help when I really was just drinking every now and then when I would have an anxiety attack or I would have, whatever. Really, I was just using it when I had an issue. But I wanted to nip it in the bud, and I go in and I told him I was having these anxiety attacks that are interesting because I've had people, well, what was it like? What'd you feel like? And if I'm gifted at anything, I'm pretty good with words and being able to tell a story, as you said, or describe things. And there aren't words that I can find to express what these feelings felt like. It was like I was going to implode, like the weight of the world. It was this dark feeling, and it was indescribable. So anyway, so I went in to see him, and I said, "Hey, man, I'm having these with more frequency, and is there anything you can give me to take the edge off or whatever?" And he was just like, "In the job you're in with those security clearances, no." He said, "It's either I can medicate you, absolutely." but you can't stay in that job. You can't be, on anything and in it. And so I sarcastically, kind of flippantly just said, well, what am I supposed to do? Drink a pint of whiskey every night? And he looked at me and he just goes,
Wow.
and he said,
That
kind of
pissed me
has to say
off.
it like that.
That pissed me off.
And so
That
it
guy,
began.
that guy, Jimmy, and I'm definitely not using the word for doc. That guy spoke death to you that day. He spoke death into your life. You were having symptoms that to me are predictable from your experiences. That's the fight or flight system being injured, being chronically locked on into chronic threat response. And there is a treatment. The stellate ganglion block is an injection that is used in special forces to reset the adrenaline system and take that darkness and that loss of control back to a baseline. It's not psychoactive. Guys in special forces, I was just at the Chicago flagship for Stella last week and took 5 guys through treatment that last week. And 4 of them had a combination actually of stellate ganglion block and ketamine, which is really interesting. Now, you never could have gotten ketamine probably with your clearances, at least at this point. Maybe we could talk about why you might or might not get that, but stellate ganglion block, it's just an anesthetic. Like if you can go to the dentist and get Novocaine, you can get the medication that is used for this stellate ganglion block, and it would reset your system. And so he gave you permission and urging and a push to actually develop a raging alcohol dependence. No healer should do that, especially when there's another alternative. And, there's a podcast I did with SEAC, Ramon Colin Lopez, that might be of interest to some of your listeners. It's, I think Bluff is the name of his podcast. I think it was episode 4, but if you look up Bluff and podcast and Shauna Springer, Doc Springer is probably under, you can listen to that episode in more detail.
All right. Well, I wound up going through this experience. Maybe the positive is, we're sitting here talking about it today, and hopefully people will listen, and people that need to hear it can seek help.
Yeah, there are things that work. There are things that work, and the experiences you're describing are common among warfighters. Even if you don't have an index trauma, one big thing, it's the accumulation of that like high pressure, high responsibility, high stakes environment, where there's also, I think we're also talking about moral injuries too, Jimmy. I think it's not just post-traumatic stress injury, that fight or flight stuff, but that when people talk about that darkness pressing in on them, there's something often of feeling of moral contamination. And you don't have to do anything outside of your warrior code to get these sensations. Just being in these environments and feeling helpless as a warrior when things happen to civilians, innocents, will leave you with that feeling of taint or shame or contamination. And there are things that can really help with that. And that's where I think in the next 10 years, I would predict ketamine is really going to come into the fore and play a role there, because it's really good about taking people into like a lucid dream state where they go into their cave and they reckon with shame, survivor guilt, grief, and loss in those sessions. And so when we take care of our special forces operators with the Stella Soft protocol, we do both. And what we find is that the dual sympathetic reset, the SGB, will prune the nerve fibers that causes constant fight or flight. And then the ketamine has a property that allows new nerve growth in healthy adaptive ways that are not sending you into constant fight or flight, but that are helping you address the challenges in your life with a more open, neutral perspective.
Right. Well, I should plug what worked for me as well, in terms of getting sober, and that was, being humble enough. And if I say that braggadociously, I'm okay with it, because it is not easy to go check yourself into rehab. And it was, I knew that I had to, and I did. They say you got to hit a low or whatever, and it's just as off used and said as it is, it's true. You've got to have you got to be pretty desperate, I think, to the average person, to be humble enough to say, I need help, and go in. But going in, I was scared to death, because I was like, what? I'm going to be in here with a bunch of freaking crazies. And there were some crazies, all right. And some of them probably thought I was him. and, there was a business guy there, or I owned two businesses. And he said, I drink all day long. I needed help. He said, I parked my truck in the parking lot to come check myself in, and I guzzled a pint of whiskey before I walked to the front desk, and this is a guy that, is a respectable businessman. There was a guy there. All of the folks that worked with us were recovering, from everything, alcohol, drugs, whatever. There was a guy there that became just I really, really connected with him. And he'd been on meth for 13 years. And he was like, it was this or 19 years in prison. And I've been here for 13 years now, and I couldn't imagine serving anywhere else. And it's just a wonderful guy that got clean and now is giving back. And it was what I needed to be able to walk away. And I haven't had a drink since. So it worked. It'll work if you want to work. But the big thing that I've said many times now is, as I've opened up about this, you can't quit for someone else. You can't quit out of fear of getting a DUI. You can't quit out of fear of losing your job. It won't work. You got to quit for you. You got to want to really do it for you, for it to stick. It's too powerful. It's indescribable. Of once you get to the point where it's in control, it is really in control.
Yeah. I mean, so ideally, the reason why we have these conversations is to help people get control before they lose it as much as you did, to maybe not hit rock bottom or have such a terrible experience where it takes that to see yourself in the mirror. So I was just jotting down a couple of ideas I had about how could you tell earlier. Well, one of the things we talked about, right, is that if you were to take yourself off of alcohol for a period of time, do you notice any physical symptoms like headache or tremors or anything? Is there anything physically that registers that your body actually is addicted, that it needs that thing? That would be something really to pay attention to, because that means you're pretty far down that tunnel. Another thing that's just more on the kind of creative side is, imagine for a second that you pulled together a focus group. Focus group means a mixed group of folks that weigh in on something. And this focus group is composed of people in your family, maybe your spouse, maybe a sibling, a couple people you went to college or school with, a couple people you serve with. It's a mixed group. And then you had them comment on a live video of a week in the life of Jimmy and his relationship with alcohol. Right? So if everything you did with alcohol were to be filmed and presented to your focus group, right? All the secret, in the gas station, going into the bathroom and pounding a couple 8-ounce, drinks and then throwing the gum and, would you be okay with that? Would your relationship with alcohol be sort of normal and shame-free from your perspective? If not, that would be something to pay attention to. Some of the kind of standard assessments ask things like, has anybody ever commented that it's a problem or they're concerned about it? But sometimes you're so good at hiding it that it takes a question like that. Like if it were all to be posted on my YouTube channel, right? Every drinking, behavior that I had, would I be cool with that? If not, it's maybe something to think about a little bit differently. And then the other question, there was a really wonderful book called Drinking a Love Story that described alcohol as kind of a mistress. Does it have a call to you? Does it pull you? Does it whisper to you? Does it have a voice? Or is it just a tool, right? Does it have a call?
The interesting thing with that, I've always been, even when I was in college, let's say, I could never drink socially. Like, some people can have a cocktail and go home and whatever. One makes me want two, and two makes me really want three. I've never been able to just drink in moderation. I'm either on or off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. And that's you and a lot of people, right? So are you able to, that's another question that would typically be asked. Are you able to consistently limit yourself to 1 or 2 drinks? Or use as an objective, I'm going to stop at 2. Do you always go 3, 4, 5, 10? That would be something to really pay in terms of alcohol's capacity to take your life from you.
Right. Well, Shauna, I appreciate your time today. This has been fascinating for me. And I just hope, the only reason I'm willing to pick the scab on this thing is because I know so many people that do need help, that are struggling with it. And some of them are open. I mean, I have friends who tell me they know they need to, they just aren't ready to quit. And I don't push them, for someone trying to help their friends or whatever. I'm not that guy, and I would encourage you not to be, because it's just not effective to just continue to badger them about it. You should be someone that they can talk. I want them to want to talk to me about it. And then it's, well, you just said to me, it's too much. Yeah, I do. And that you need to quit. Yeah. Well, then you're the only one that can make that decision. None of us can make that for you. And just gently urging, gently pushing, because I don't want to push them away by judging or saying you need to get a grip. That doesn't work.
Yeah, you'll create a reaction.
Yeah,
will push them further away from help. But talking about the difficult parts of that for you, realizing that you didn't have control, realizing that you didn't feel proud of yourself.
Yeah.
There was a piece of, I think, episode 2 where you talked about when you had that control again, you actually liked yourself again.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I hated what I saw. I looked in the mirror and hated myself. And it was weird, because I struggled with, I knew the perception that a lot of other people, I mean, there are certainly people that don't like Jimmy Blackman, but there are a lot that thought I was living this great life of traveling, speaking everywhere, flying first class, staying in 5-star hotels, eating great meals, and just, wow, what a dream life. And I was miserable. And
yeah, so that's disintegration. Another thing to pull apart and recognize, when like the you're projecting to the world, there's like this other you that's like very different, very dark, very controlled by your dependencies, and where you don't like yourself anymore. You're not proud of yourself anymore. That's a terrible place to find yourself. And I would want to say that, there are healing programs and partnerships, and, Stella is one of them. We have a partnership with APN, All Points North. It's a beautiful addiction focused program. They have a center in Colorado. They have a center in Malibu. And they do the treatment. So when I talk about a treatment like dual sympathetic reset, stellate ganglion block, I'm not talking about just doing that by itself. That is only primer to the paint of all the work a person does. Like when you checked yourself into detox and rehab, you have to do the work to earn that life that's free of that substance. And so both have to happen. And the two in combination is what I've seen be really powerful for many of the people that I serve and support.
Right. Well, awesome. Well, Shauna, you're a rock star. Thanks for your time. I appreciate you coming on and picking Jimmy apart for everyone. And thanks for all on behalf of all the warriors out there. I mean, you've touched a lot of lives. So thanks for all the work you've done.
Thanks, Jimmy. Always
take care.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Dark roads and a hero passes by, another one's gone to the other side.